Welcome, everybody. First of all, I'd like to start with the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, our next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, November 15th. We had planned to do a recap of the emergency food supply meeting that was held in August by popular demand, but that hasn't been confirmed. And we may want to do, I have a feeling there's a lot of people that couldn't make it tonight because there's a Republican meeting and there's a couple of other things, so we might want to have a follow-up of this. On that note, if anybody ever has any topic that you think you'd want us to discuss, please just let me know, because knowledge is power. Tonight's meeting will be about Agenda 21. We're fortunate to have Hal Shurtleff of the John Birch Society, who will be presenting information on the subject. Hal, of Camp Constitution fame, is highly proficient on Agenda 21 and travels throughout New England, probably further too, to disseminate this information. Camp Constitution was the vision of Hal, longtime activist and staffer of the John Birch Society. It's a week-long camp that trains teenagers, and their families in some cases, in the values, documents, and history, the true history, not the ridiculous history in left-wing history books, that made this nation great. The John Birch Society is an American political advocacy group that supports anti-communism, limited government, a constitutional republic, and personal freedom. Sound familiar? JBS was the precursor of what we now call the Tea Party movement. Over the years, they have taken a lot of slack for being racist, radical right, anti-Semitic, you name it. After 50 years, I think we can all agree that their ideas were prophetic, to say the least. As someone whose generation was going to San Francisco with flowers in their hair, I was campaigning for Barack Obama. The Society upholds an originalist interpretation of the U.S. Constitution, which it identifies with fundamentalist Christian principles. It seeks to limit the powers of government and opposes wealth redistribution, economic interventionism. It opposes what is described as collectivism and totalitarianism, particularly communism, but also socialism and fascism, which it claims are infiltrating into the United States administration. The Society, among other things, has been active in supporting the auditing of and aims to eventually dismantle the Federal Reserve System. The JBS believes that the U.S. Constitution gave only Congress the ability to coin money and did not intend for it to delegate this power to a banking monopoly or to transform it into a fiat currency not backed by gold or silver. The Society continues to press for an end to U.S. membership in the United Nations. As evidence of the effectiveness of JBS efforts, the Society points to the Utah state legislature's failed resolution calling for U.S. withdrawal, as well as the actions of several other states where the Society's membership has been active. The Society repeatedly opposed overseas war-making, although it is strongly supportive of the American military. It has issued calls to bring our troops home in every conflict since its founding, including Vietnam. Most Americans are unaware that one of the greatest threats to their freedom may be a United Nations program known as Agenda 21. The United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, Division for Sustainable Development, created Agenda 21 as a sustainability agenda which is arguably an amalgamation of socialism and extreme environmentalism brushed with anti-American, anti-capitalist overtones. Agenda 21 outlines in detail the UN's vision for a centrally managed global society. This contract binds governments around the world to the United Nations plans for controlling the way we live, eat, learn, move, and communicate, all under the noble banner of saving the earth. If fully implemented, Agenda 21 would have the government involved in every aspect of life of every human on earth. It is a project that we all need to become familiar with. Agenda 21 has never been debated or adopted by the Congress of the United States. Nevertheless, it is being vigorously implemented by the administrative agencies of the federal government and by other nations around the world. More than 150 nations, including the United States of America, are participants in the United Nations Commission on Sustainable Development. America's participation is not the result of an international treaty ratified by Congress. America's participation is the result of George Bush, signing Agenda 21 at the 1992 United Nations Conference on Environment and Development in Rio. Whether you agree or disagree with the concept, it's important you are informed of the details. This subject is beginning to surface more and more with many states, starting with the implementation of smart meters that are being met with resistance. So please welcome Hal Shurtleff.
Places, venues was a comedy club. So one of our good members who ran for Congress said, "You got to tell a joke, Hal." And I thought, well, I'll tell one that's germane to the topic here. There's this fellow lived in the backwoods, a little cabin, and he had very little contact with the outside world. Every now and then he'd go into town and barter and trade some things, but pretty much stayed to himself. Well, one winter, he fell down and got a terrible sprained ankle. So he was very limited to what he could do. So what he would do is he'd throw some bait in front of his cabin, and with his double-barrel shotgun, wait till whatever showed up, and he'd just blam away and eat whatever he could crawl out there and cook it up, bring it back to the cabin. Well, one particular afternoon, there was some Greenpeace activists and some various, Birkenstock types wearing snowshoes, of course, it's wintertime, and they saw that he had shot, among other animals, a spotted owl. Well, of course, that's a crime. So they immediately went to the Parks Department and the National Forest Service, and within a matter of no time, these policemen, special police with the black Ninja Warrior outfits came, surrounded the cabin, machine guns and helicopters, and they dragged him out, put him in chains, threw him in a patrol car, brought him right in front of the judge. I mean, no mercy on this guy whatsoever. Well, the woodsman knew that he was wrong. He knew he shot a spotted owl, and knew he probably shouldn't have done it, but extenuating circumstances. So he was going to just throw himself at the mercy of the judge. He said, "I don't have any money for a lawyer. I don't want to drag this out. I'm just going to plead guilty and whatever." So went to the judge. Judge says, "How do you plead, sir?" "Guilty, Your Honor. I did have extenuating circumstances. I was injured, but I should know better." And the judge said, "You're right. You're a man of the woods." He said, "I'm going to be lenient this time. A 10-year suspended sentence and only a $100,000 fine. But if I ever see you in front of my courtroom again, you're going to jail for a long time, fella." "Oh, thank you, Your Honor, thank you." He's walking out the door. Judge says, "Just a minute, sir." He says, I just have one question." "Yes?" "What does a spotted owl taste like?" "Oh, Your Honor, it's like a cross between a bald eagle and a condor." Well, before I give my presentation, by the way, I always like to mention some recommended reading. And there are some very important things that whatever you take from this, from my brief presentation here, probably not going to remember most of it, because I forget half of it anyway. But I've got some books on the table, various modestly priced. One of them deals with the military in the UN, called Changing Commands. The UN isn't just interested in the environment, but also our military. There's a little book on the table called, what did I do with it? And there's a few other books on the table dealing with the UN. Inside the United Nations, a little primer on the subject for people who don't know a whole lot. So they're very modestly priced. This is a reprint from the New American Magazine, which is published by the John Birch Society. Came out in February. And these are take one, free, and if you want more copies, they're 2 for $1. And I also have this in PDF format. And if you'd like to have this in a PDF format to help get it out, and I'm going to tell you what I did with this on PDF format that opened up tons and tons of doors for us. And there's other items on the table that are, I think, important. One of the things that's fundamental, what kind of government do we have in this country? Well, the average person might say democracy. We're a constitutional republic. And how do we know that? Because our Constitution says so. In 1962, the JBS's founder, Robert Welch, gave a speech called Republics and Democracies. And I have our camp Constitution, I actually put this into print with permission. And interesting that 1928, the U.S. Army manual, training manual that went to all the soldiers, said that our country is a republic and that democracy leads to mobocracy, right? Well, what happened in 1933? Someone changed the definition. So Robert also documents that. Then you have to ask the question, why? Why was it so important to change the fundamental definition? Another little booklet on the table is the story of Davy Crockett, how a farmer taught him about the Constitution, not yours to give. It's sort of a free market classic. I understand there's been a little historic license with that, but nevertheless it remains a great little story of how a so-called ignorant farmer, Horatio Bunce, taught a congressman how to, and as a result of that he changed his voting record. And there's a little pamphlets too on the subject of Agenda 21. Also, a DVD put out by Michael Shaw. Michael Shaw is one of the early advocates of exposing Agenda 21. He's from California. He's in Ground Zero. And back in, this was about 5 years ago, this was done in Maine, up in southern Maine, and it's part of like a 3-part series, but this is probably the best concise presentation that you'll get on the subject. So one is free if you want more, and if you want to take quantities, and I suggest that you do get these in the hands of your selectmen, because even if you have one town, or even if there's only a couple of communities that belong to ICLEI, sustainable development is being pushed by the federal government and probably the state government, so they need to be aware of it. So please, we're all activists here, please take some. And if you want to put it on cable TV, you're welcome to do that too. Before I start, I want to qualify a few things. The John Birch Society, and I'd like to give everybody in this room, including myself, we want to see a clean environment. I don't know too many people say, I want dirty air, I want polluted water, I want dirty streets with glass everywhere, and I want to see all the forests chopped down. I don't think too many people believe that, want that. But the question is, what's the best way to preserve our future? I believe, and I like to think everybody in this room believes, that you can do that through the free market system. That private property is the best way to maintain a clean environment. Lots of examples of that throughout the country. And one of our former CEOs was into water skiing in Wisconsin. The lake that he was using was pretty dirty. So what did he do? Did he go to the UN? No, he went to the business people. And within a short time, that water quality changed dramatically as a result of local people solving the problem. If you think government's a solution to environmental problems, look at China, communist China, and see how pristine their environment is when the government owns anything. Or the old Soviet Union or Cuba, when the federal government owns property, they're not all that good with it. If you want to look at environmental disasters, look at a military post, for example. They don't care about, you own a business, you're not going to destroy your land, but if you don't own it, you may be more responsive to that. Also, the notion of green jobs. We've heard a lot about green technology. That's going to be the savior of our economy. Well, we had in Massachusetts, where I live, there was a company that made solar blades for windmills, right? Windmills, like it's new technology. You know, it's technology that's 1,000 years old. All of a sudden, they just invented the windmill. The taxpayers ponied up $65 million. The state House representatives and the Senate of Massachusetts said to the governor, go ahead, $65 million, it's yours, go ahead, give it to this company. Now, that is economic fascism, when the state and local and businesses work together. It's fascism without the goose steps, you know. So, and that was done under our Governor Deval Patrick. I call him Obama Light, you know, because he came out of nowhere. He's up in Chicago. Next you know, he's governor of Massachusetts, and he had the same silly, stupid slogans: hope and change, yes we can, and all this nonsense. Well, his company got all the startup money, and 5 years later they said, we're going to communist China. Oh, they don't say communist, they're going to China. They can't make any money here. And where they're located, interestingly enough, is an ICLEI member. They're in what used to be Fort Devens, it's now called Devens, and it's not really a town, it's sort of a state-run entity, and they're moving out because they can't make any money. After they got the $65 million from the taxpayers of Massachusetts, enough to perfect the technique, and now shipping it overseas. 500 people will now be out of their jobs because of this green technology. And what about the big company in California? Solyndra, all right? Another example of green technology going nowhere. If there's green technology and it's market-driven, I'm all in favor of it. In fact, I'm of the opinion when you recycle and the state or town or city picks up your trash, they should pay you because they're selling it to a private sector in some cases. I know in Connecticut, they're actually making a profit. So if I buy something and I'm paying for the package, I buy the food, but I'm paying for the box, everything, right? Why can't I make money? Why can't you buy it from me? So in essence, they're actually taking stuff from us without realizing, hey, we can make money, but you owe it to us. No, give us some money. That's how the free market works, you see. Yeah. So I think, again, the free market is the way to go when it comes to saving the environment or preserving it. And the word sustainable development, they have their definition is to be able to provide for the needs today without hurting the needs of the folks tomorrow. That's their nice little, but what does that mean? Well, if you read their definition, if you get to the fine print, the middle class, it's not sustainable. If you have an internal combustion engine, not sustainable. Private property, and if you're living, you have a big living space, maybe more than 2,000 or 3,000 square feet, not sustainable. If you commute to a job more than 10 miles, not sustainable, and on and on and on it goes. So, and but I'll get to that as we go along. So, what I tell people, if there was a UN occupational force that came to your town or your state or your city, what would you do? And some people would say, that's never going to happen, it's a lot of nonsense, it's a lot of conspiracies, nonsense. Although we did see Mexican soldiers in Katrina. We have we did have a German Air Force training over in New Mexico a few years ago, and this North American Union, which is another topic, they're talking about merging the militaries. We see European Union now has one military, so they can't act autonomously anymore. And the UN's long-term goal is to have a one world or UN standing army. So, but getting back to my question, what would you do? And I'd like to think if that happened, most people in this room would resist by any means possible, right? But guess what happened, folks? The UN's come to your town, in your city, in your state, and it wasn't done by the UN General Secretary. It wasn't done by, there's not a bunch of barefooted soldiers from the jungles of somewhere doing atrocities. No, the UN came to your town by your neighbors, the person that may be in your church, maybe the school teacher, maybe your old babysitter, who's now a selectman. They brought it in under something called Agenda 21. And they did it without any approval from Congress, right, and without the knowledge of most people. Because, and I talk about how many people I've been visiting these towns and cities that belong to these entities, and they don't even know what I'm talking about. If I say sustainable development, they know. I say smart growth, but if I said Agenda 21, right over the head. What's that? I have no idea. Anyway, here are two contrasting documents in the world. Actually, there's a third. I should put that up. It's called the Communist Manifesto. Have we all read the Communist Manifesto? If we haven't, you should be familiar with at least the 10 planks. This was put out in 1848 by Karl Marx. He plagiarized most of it. But the 10 planks, among other things, calls for the abolition of private property. If you go to Agenda 21 site, you're going to find the same thing, no private property. Industrial armies, state control of the credit, and the end of private education and complete control of education by the state. So that's what Karl Marx wanted. But here you see the UN Charter. How many people have read the UN Charter in this room? Not many, no one, right? No one's into it. I know by the next couple of days I bet you're going to be reading it too, right? We've all read the Constitution, all right? And some of us read it and probably memorized a lot of parts of it. Now, these are two contrasting documents. This document protects God-given rights. It doesn't give us, it protects what belongs to us. This document gives us rights and takes them away at the same time. There is no concept of God. Governments are granted to you by the government, by the UN or by the countries you're living in or the states. Quite the contrast. And in spite of all the propaganda that you get at UN, in classrooms all over the country, the UN is a war-making organization. It's not a peace-making organization. And let me give you just a couple of examples of that, if you doubt me, okay? Yeah, we call this the house that Hiss built. It's interesting that the Rockefellers bought this land to give it to the UN. And every time the Rockefellers buy something and give something away, it's usually they have an exterior motive, not just out of generosity of their hearts. Anybody know who this guy is? Alger Hiss. Well, you should know because he's the guy that wrote the UN Charter, or at least most of it. He was also a Soviet agent, and people will say, well, the poor guy grew up in a bad neighborhood, you know, how can you blame him for being a communist? Well, no, he wasn't. He was a man of privilege from an upper middle class, wealthy background, went to Columbia, which is not exactly a junior college. This is where he became a communist, an agent of Stalin. And if you ever see a picture of Roosevelt and Churchill at Yalta, he's right behind Roosevelt, advising him. Yeah, give Joe everything, Franklin. Give him the whole, and he did. Eastern Europe, 5 million people were forced back at the hands of, back to the hands of Stalin, Operation Keelhaul. And this evil man was responsible for that. He was found guilty of lying under oath. He said he wasn't a Communist Party member, and the statute of limitations had ran out, but he did lie to Congress. He spent about a year or two in jail and went back to his practice in Massachusetts. Now, that's the man who gave us the UN Charter. What possible good can come from the pen of a man, an unrepentant Soviet agent? To the day he died, he denied he was ever a Soviet agent. Here's an example of our peacekeepers in action. Now, this isn't just one rare example. You know, that happened. There's always atrocities in wartime, they can say. This was 2 Canadian soldiers under UN command in Somalia back in 1997. And they have a young black man who was being tortured. Now, I was in the Army, and I remember learning about the Geneva Convention, and we weren't supposed to put people over flames. Not even, combatants. This guy looks like he was probably just a civilian, not in uniform. He eventually died, by the way. Did you see this on your news? You remember seeing this? Now, the Rodney King incident happened about the same time. Everybody remembers that, don't we? Why did we see that, but we didn't see this? And maybe we should have seen the Rodney King incident time and time and time again. But how come you didn't hear about this? By the way, it was the Village Voice that broke this story of all entities. A very liberal newspaper. And this happens a lot. It's not, like I say, a rare example. UNICEF is an arm of the UN. They had a child pornography ring at their headquarters, child pedophile ring as well. And the reporter who broke the story, a European, thought he'd get a Pulitzer Prize. Oh no, they scolded him. He was treated very poorly. Okay, remember the oil for food in Iraq? We made a lot of money off that, right? Remember what happened in Rwanda? Remember that movie, Hotel Rwanda?
Yeah.
And there were about close to 1 million people that were massacred by one tribe over the next, the Tutsis and the Hutus against the Tutsis. Well, there was a Canadian general, part of the UN mission, that tried to stop it. He got wind of what was happening. And by the way, the UN trucks helped transport a lot of the Tutsis, the Hutus to kill the Tutsis. And he went to the man in charge of the civilian mission to see, because he needed his permission. He said, "Stand down." That man was Kofi Annan, who later became head of the UN and got a Peace Prize, Nobel Peace Prize. And those are the kind of folks we're dealing with. Okay. Here's another picture of, hey, we're going to bring a democracy, or we're going to blow your brains out. I found this right on the internet, by the way. I don't remember the exact frame of reference. I think he was a Canadian or a European soldier, and this was in Somalia. Yeah, we're going to bring democracy, like it or not, fella. That's what we're going to do. So, by the way, you know why there's so much pro-UN sentiment? You have hundreds of NGOs, non-government organizations. And these NGOs are certified by the UN, and their goal is to promote the UN. And you've got UN Association, the World Federalists, you've got practically every environmental organization, World Wildlife, World Heritage, all of these entities, their goal is to push the UN's mission. And they're doing it very well. And in public schools and many private schools, they have Model UN, they go to the UN and they get all this kind of propaganda. There's not enough of us telling the truth about the UN, so this is what they get, you see. Our organization's been saying, get us out of the UN for 50 years. And thankfully, more and more people are starting to pay attention. It's not just a bunch of third world dictators, you know. If that was the case, it wouldn't be a big problem. It's people in this country who have had 3 generations of pro-UN sentiment that think the Constitution's obsolete, that want world government. And I've debated this folks. And some of them are well-intentioned people. They're not necessarily all evil, two-headed monsters. But they think the best way to have peace and freedom is through a world government. And I don't know how they can see that, but that's what they're advocating. Now, here's a book called Death by Government, which written by a liberal professor from the University of Hawaii. And it was published in the mid-90s. You can find this on Amazon for about $15. It's not a pleasant book to read. It's not something you read, like reading or something at the beach. But he documents genocide by governments in peacetime in the 20th century. And he concluded that more people have been killed by their governments in peacetime than in wartime. I mean, a whole lot more. And most of these genocides happened after 1950, and many of the nations responsible were members in good standing at the UN. Okay? Now, we've heard that, well, all right now, okay, I understand that, but the UN still does a lot of benevolent things. It helps people in poor countries. It gives them medicine and so forth. Some of us might remember the story of Al Capone. I don't think too many people are going to think he was a good guy. He was a criminal. He had a lot of people, murdered a lot of people, a lot of terrible things he did. I'm not comparing him to Kofi Annan. I mean, he's a quiet one compared to Kofi Annan. But he also had soup kitchens, didn't he? And if you were living in Chicago during the Depression, and he fed you, you'd be hard-pressed to say anything bad about the guy. But he did it for public relations. You know, it wasn't that he was trying to provide for the poor out of the generation. I mean, that's a noble thing to do, by the way. We all should be doing that. But that's why he did it. Well, The Lords of Poverty is a book written by Graham Hancock, a liberal English journalist, I guess you can say liberal and journalist in almost the same term. It's almost synonymous, you know. And he documents the big, all of the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and all of these lending institutions, and how they create a lot of problems. And I'll give you an example. You remember the rainforest issue back in Brazil in the like early 80s, mid 80s? And the rainforest was being chopped down by the evil, greedy capitalists, and the UN had to come in and we have to have a green army headed by Mikhail Gorbachev. That's one of the things they proposed, to stop these kinds of things. By the way, you might see your own state environmental police now carrying guns. They do in Massachusetts. They used to come with a little citation book. Now they're packing heat. They've been doing that for a while. You know. So they're serious, folks. You know, it's not your friendly Smokey the Bear. You know, this guy, we're gonna draw this gun on you if you give us trouble. So he documents how how this problem has been caused by the UN lending institutions and all the corruption. And I won't go into it because it's another topic, but the Brazilian rainforest, the local scientists, the agronomists were saying this soil will not be good for what you want to grow here. So you shouldn't be cutting these trees down. It's not going to be productive. The money was coming in anyway. And when it's a federal or government policy, they don't care about what's the reality. They say the money's coming, we're going to do it. And they did it. And so the rest is history. So that's an example of how a government causes the problem. Okay, so the lords of poverty. I encourage you to look at the Charter of the UN. You'll see where it's a war-making organization. And incidentally, since Korea, we've always fought under the UN auspices, with few exceptions. Maybe Panama was one exception, Grenada was another exception. A couple of rescue missions may have been without the UN approval. But both Gulf Wars that we're in, Afghanistan, Vietnam was fought under a UN entity. Okay, so that's why we don't win wars anymore, folks. And when we so-called win them, what do? Like in Afghanistan, you become a Christian, you're put to death. Remember that guy that became a Christian? He had to get asylum in Italy. That was the leader that we put in charge there, you see. So don't think that's what we really want. So I encourage you to go, or I don't want the line and find it. It's not like it's hard to find. In 1992, well, I should get back to 1990. 1990, there was a... got myself here. Let's see. All right. Well, in 1992, there was a conference in Rio, the Rio conference. It was the head by Maurice Strong. Oh, I have that slide. I had these redone here. Maybe he took them out. Oh, he must have taken them out. Well, let me see. Because I had a picture of the. I had a picture of the event there in Rio. No? Okay. Anyway, take my word for it. 1992, there was an assembly of about 18,000 bureaucrats from all over the world, Rio de Janeiro. My colleague, who actually was at the event, Bill Jasper, you might have, Rachel, you might have heard Bill Jasper speak. He said there were globies, greenies, socialists, communists, and diapered swamis in this event. And two of the diapered swamis were Al Gore and John Kerry, pictured in this. And I have an article of this, if you like, I can give it to you in PDF. And what came out of that was Agenda 21, among other things. 1,000+ page document that is binding on all living things on the planet. Kind of a modest agenda, would you say? And it was written by people who started something called the ICLEI, 1990, International Council on Local Environmental Initiative for Local Governments for Sustainable Development. They renamed it or added a little bit to it. And in 1992, President Bush, then President Bush, signed the agreement that the United States would implement Agenda 21. In 1993, Bill Clinton created the Office of Sustainable Development. And just recently, Obama just started a rural councils. This rural councils is designed to implement Agenda 21 in the rural areas. And the goal, now here's a map of it's called the Wildland. This came out of Agenda 21. And a friend of mine, Dr. Michael Kaufman, was able to get this. Find this on the internet. Now, I'm glad it's so big. Usually I don't have a screen that's this big. So you see where the red is? That's called core reserves and corridors, little to no human use. That's a big chunk of our country, folks. Now, Agenda 21 means the 21st century. They have 100 years. It's not going to be implemented tomorrow or 2 days from now. It's going to take a while to do this. And it's been implemented, almost 20 years now. Elements have been already implemented, okay? Where you see the yellow are called buffer zones, where there's highly regulated use. And then you see a little bit of green, it says normal use, and normal use zones of cooperation. And you see the black, this is where the densely populated areas will be. And they refer to this as the stack-em and pack-em communities. Okay? So that is the agenda in a nutshell. Every branch of our government is pushing this. Now, the ICLEI, you don't have to belong to the ICLEI for your town to participate in its agenda. This is an international government-to-government organization in clear violation of Article 1, Section 10, which says that states cannot confederate. Now, what does that mean? States, the state of Rhode Island, cannot become part of the European Union. They cannot have a treaty with another nation. Right? They can't declare war on France. They would probably beat France, but they can't do that. It's unconstitutional. There's also something else. Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution says that every state is guaranteed a Republican form of government. If you belong to ICLEI or it's under its auspices, you are not a Republican government. So that's the second thing. I just kind of, as I'm reading the Constitution for the 1,000th time, I thought, oh yeah, here's another thing that's unconstitutional. So here is about ICLEI. Local Governments for Sustainability is an association of over 1,220 local government members who are committed to sustainable development. Our members come from 70 different countries and represent more than almost 600 million people. So you don't have to actually vote for it, but if you live in a town or a city or a county, you're part of it. They consider you a member, okay? And Spain and Greece are big into ICLEI, and both countries are in the tank economically, right? California has more ICLEI members, counties. It's all at ground zero, and that state is going belly up because of ICLEI. They're losing a lot of industry. This article that I showed earlier, as a matter of fact, it clearly demonstrates how many of these businesses in California have either moved out of the state or relocating, either in other states or other parts of the world. And when you lose your tax base and you lose your population, and that's the goal, folks. That's the goal. And Schwarzenegger was big into that. He and Obama worked to get that solar energy company going. So it says it provides technical consulting, training, and information services to build capacity, share knowledge, and support local government in the implementation of sustainable development at the local level. Our basic premise is that locally designed initiatives can provide an effective and cost-efficient way to achieve local, national, and global sustainability objectives. Okay? Now, this is your leadership of ICLEI. I bet you know all these folks, right? Now, you might know your governor, you might know your state rep, you might know the local mayor or what have you, but these are the folks that are calling the shots. And most Americans don't even know these people. President David Cadman from Vancouver, British Columbia. A household name, right? The only American United States person was the mayor of Seattle, Washington, and North Little Rock, Patrick Hayes. Okay, we all know him. Here's your General Secretary. His name is Conrad Otto Zimmerman. You know him? He's the Burgermeister of your towns and cities that belong to ICLEI. We thought we got rid of the Germans in 1945, well, they're back. And if you look at his pedigree, it's got nothing to do with limited government, freedom under the Constitution. It's all big government. Everything he promotes is globalism. Conrad Otto Zimmerman, that's your man. Now, I have been doing a lot of visits. I visit a lot of these town halls and city halls in my travels that belong to ICLEI and Agenda 21. And the town of Dedham, above Boston, it's just to the southwest corner. You think of it as sort of a conservative, some blue collar, upper middle class. It's a nice mixture, nice clean little town. You go through downtown Dedham, it's like almost stepping into the 50s, a little movie theater, you know, nice little shops. You go to the town hall, and I'm looking for evidence of Agenda 21. And by the way, the infamous Sacco and Vanzetti trial took place in Dedham. Has a lot of interesting history. First canal in the country went right through Dedham. Okay, started in Dedham. And I didn't have to look too hard. This was a gigantic check from the state of Massachusetts, the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Services gave this town, you know, $180,000, almost $200,000, to implement Massachusetts has something called the Green Initiative. So if you're a green town, and one of the things they recommend is to join the ICLEI. So here's an unelected branch of our government is advocating towns and cities to join an unconstitutional entity, and they're using the taxpayers' money to bribe you. Okay, that might be happening here in Rhode Island as well. Okay, so here I went. This is Marshfield, Massachusetts. And Marshfield was a very interesting case. Marshfield is a town that's pioneered by my ancestors in the 1650s. And you go into Marshfield and you see this display. Be a greenscaper, all kinds of stuff. Get a rain barrel. So you can buy a rain barrel. Now, they invented the rain barrel all of a sudden, you know. And again, I'm all in favor of recycling when it's market driven, because sometimes recycling actually is a drain on the economy, as we know. I went upstairs to speak to to leave off information. I usually have one of these with me, a batch of these with me, along with DVDs. I gave copies to the selectmen, and went into the town manager's office. His name was Rocco Longo. And I went inside, and I had the article in my hand, and I said, I'm here to give... He said, why do you think I want that? Very, very sharp and stern. I says, well, your town belongs to, and before I could finish, I know what it belongs to. I'm not interested in that. I says, oh, okay, well, I didn't have to be rude. I'm not being rude, I'm just not interested. So I took his business card, you know, I went on my way, went online, did a little research. This guy's agenda is all globalism, internationalism. He's an unelected official of the town of Marshfield, doesn't even live in Marshfield. And I think I'm using a different PowerPoint. I have updated one with the application that Marshfield actually filled out to become ICLEI member. And it talks about getting an ICLEI charter. It's almost like saying, we are handing our town over to you folks, and his name is on it. Well, in a more sane day, we'd call that something that starts with a T, wouldn't we? Right? Yeah. Now, does he know any better? I don't know. Maybe not. You know, you give people the benefit of the doubt, but on this guy, I'm not so sure. Okay? Okay, yeah, this was a different slide. So I did bring some handout. Well, I visited the town of Wellesley, and in Wellesley, Massachusetts, another bedroom community near Boston, I found all of these handouts that are designed to give to children. And anyway, my apologies. I had two different slides, and this was not the updated one. But I found this little coloring book that warns the children about how to fight global warming, which, by the way, does not agree. There's no man-made global warming. Hopefully, most of us realize that by now. And in other town halls and city halls, I see the same sentiment. I was in Indiana not too long ago, and downtown Indiana, there was a table from the Mayor's Office of Sustainability, right? And a nice young lady behind the counter passing these coloring books out. I said, you ever heard of Agenda 21? She said, never heard of it. And I believe her. I said, well, what you're doing is promoting it. So I had stuff with me, and I gave it to her. And, but you very seldom, I haven't found any evidence of information at these town halls that advocate freedom, limited government under the Constitution, and advocating children support freedom and liberty. And these town halls, folks, belong to us too. And what I usually do is in fact, some of the slides will show what I put in material down, these reprints and these DVDs, because these town halls belong to us too, not just the folks that want to destroy our form of government. It's interesting that the town halls are advocating the vehicle of their own destruction, because all they'll do is implement the agenda from the top, from the international community. They will have very little say. They're just almost like a Judas goat. You also find a lot of businesses that are going green, right? And I had a picture on one of the presentations. It's several companies. One company has been in business since the 1880s. It says, Massachusetts' biggest green builder. Well, they're buying into this nonsense. A green builder, I don't know what that's supposed to mean. The free market will say, look, we want to have a house that's going to be cool in the winter, cool in the summer, warm in the winter. Let's build it. I met a builder, an architect that came up to me in New Jersey, and he said, I do these projects. And he said, most of this is adding enormous costs without any need whatsoever. And what happens is, let me give an example. In a rural area, these Agenda 21 people come in, and they're called stakeholders. Familiar with that term, stakeholders? They get people in the community to buy into it. They have these meetings they call the Delphi technique, and they'll have these groups of people coming in, and there'll be tables with maybe eight people at each table and a facilitator. They already have a goal, is to get people in this town to accept sustainable development, smart meat, whatever. They already have the clear objective. And their goal is just to get you convinced that you're buying into it totally. And it's a very devious way. They have, people are well trained in this. There are ways to break these meetings up, but they leave and say the town wants it. All the stakeholders. Stakeholders are people of prominent people in the community, maybe a businessman or an elected official or an old family, you know, maybe a 10-generation family, and they're well known, so some of the members of those families will come in. And they leave us saying, these folks want this, and next thing you know, they bring it in. And no one is elected. No one elects to, there's not one town or one city that voted to have LEI come in. And most of the selectmen aren't voting for this either, they're just coming in. And the towns pay dues for this. And it's not the dues that really, I mean, the dues might be a few $100, but it's the implementing the agenda is what's destroying the economies of these states and these towns. So in the rural areas, they'll say, look, you have a nice 5-acre spread, a beautiful view of the mountain. If you support this, you'll be fine. We'll grandfather you in. You don't have to worry about a thing. You won't have anybody coming in building a development. You'll get that view of the mountain, and you'll be all set. But what happens if there's a fire? You know, some of these forest fires are the result of sustainable development practices. In other words, we're not going to do anything with the forest. We're not going to manage the forests. So a lot of these fires out in the western part of the country are as a result of unmanaged land, and it will burn. So, and sometimes to build a fire road, you need 3 days to get a permit to put a fire out. They want the fires to burn people out, and then they can't get a building permit. Or if you live in a hurricane area, and you bought into sustainable development, like in a lot of towns and the coast here, they're discovering that now. Well, you want to replace that barn or that shed that blew down. Oh, you can do that, but you have to have a stretch code, these new codes, which will add $100,000 to the project. Well, I can't afford that. But then you don't build. Simple as that. And you accepted this, this is what you're going to get. Okay? And here's an example. I was in Nashua, New Hampshire, just a few days ago. And one of our members in Nashua went to the mayor. She knew the mayor pretty well. And the mayor said, never heard of Agenda 21 or ICLEI, which Nashua was one of the 4 towns and cities in the state. And so I went to the town city hall, left some stuff off for the mayor, the mayor's aide, left some stuff off for the alderman, and I didn't see any overt signs of Agenda 21, which is like a check, you know, or, you know, a picture of coffee on it that says, I now run Nashua. No, nothing like that. I took a walk on Main Street and I found this storefront called Renaissance Downtowns. Probably take note of this, because you might see them around here. And I said, what's this? And I walked in, and this is the Agenda 21. This is a private company based in Long Island, and their goal is to come into these cities. They have a term for these cities too, under 100,000 people. What's the term they use? Anyway, they come in and they get state, federal, and local money, and a little bit of private money, and they build these so-called sustainable developments, communities, where they have mixed housing, Section 8. They may have retail offices on the front, retail on the front, and they call stack 'em and pack 'em housing. And the idea is to get people out of the rural areas into small 1,000 square feet of whatever it is. And another thing too, when you don't have a lot of property, you can't have much, can you? You can't buy certain things that you have a big home, you can buy stuff, you know, you can buy a lawnmower. Well, you don't have a lawnmower because you have one person doing the landscaping, you see. So the goal is to get people in these urban areas where they have very little, you know, they don't need to go very far to work and so forth. Now, there are some cases where people won't do that. It makes all the sense in the world. But when our government is pushing this, and they're pushing rails, you know, light rail, and the idea is to have the government take you from one place to the other, never mind about your own transportation. Interesting that when 100 years ago, you had all these private companies, you had railroads everywhere, right? Trolleys, you didn't need any UN to tell us how to build trolleys or what have you. So we're going to have a meeting in Nashua. We're trying to expose this, and it's just very interesting that. And when I mentioned on Facebook, some of the people responded, yeah, they mentioned their public meetings. Sure, they had the same type of public meeting. Everyone bought into it. It sounded good. We can get subsidized housing. Maybe you get a place there. You can sell your the Crown of Maine, northern Maine, not too long ago. I get up there on a somewhat regular basis. A lot of empty farms, a few farms, you know, and you know, they're still growing potatoes there. But you would think that these places would be flourishing. One town of Bridgeport, I drove through there, Bridgewater, right on Route 1, right before Presque Isle. It was a ghost town. You had a post office, Always the government businesses offices are always open. You had a post office, and you had a company that makes potato barrels, little, like a mom and pop. Everything else was closed. The general store, convenience stores, everything was closed. And that's sort of like the wave of the future. If we're not successful, if we don't stop this is what we're going to see. We're going to see highly densely populated centers, and very little economy, very little industry. And now, what's the important thing? Isn't to know about it, but what do you do about it? So what's the call to action? Well, back in, I guess it was May, I uploaded this article on my, I have a Scribd page, scribd.com, SCRIBD.com. Have we all heard of scribd.com? It's like a YouTube for documents. And when you do that, you can post it on YouTube. I mean, not YouTube, I'm sorry. You can post it on your Facebook page with a link to it. So I did that, and I thought, okay, Massachusetts has about 34 towns and cities that belong to the ICLEI. So where do you start first? It's like a mosquito in a nudist colony, where do you begin? Or the famous Chesty Puller in Marine Corps, he was in Korea, and the enemy, surrounded by the enemy, he said, shoot in any direction, we're going to hit the enemy, right? There's so much of it. Well, Carver, Massachusetts, where I guess you had some relatives there, belongs to ICLEI, another town that ancestors of mine pioneered. There's a park called Shurtleff Park. That may be my name. They might think I was someone prominent in town, which I'm not, but anyway, I posted this article on the Carver Republican Party. I just looked and see what was in Carver. Carver Tea Party, no. Carver Republican Party, up pops on the Facebook page. I clicked like, and I posted this article, and I said, you folks should understand this. Your town belongs to this ICLEI. Well, the lady that's head of the Republican Party, Lisa Martin, got back to me within a short time, and she read the article. It's only 8 pages. And she said she's never heard of this before, but it made all the sense in the world. And since then, she's become really a real Paul Revere. I mean, big time. And she's opened up more doors for us. Just one person, the light dawned, and she said, and they were able to get ICLEI out of Carver. And I spoke, this is my 10th or 12th gathering as a result of that one little article posted on Facebook. We suggest that you get this information, and there's other organizations beside the John Birch Society that have this. You can download this stuff. I'll have more, I'll leave my business card, I'll give you my business card, let's get this stuff out. I'm actually in the process of printing up thousands of these little pamphlets, so they're locally printed up so it'll be a lot less expensive. And we should be going to the town halls, the city halls, going to the media, going to the radio stations. And not like, I have this, the commies are coming, but, just saying, folks, you need to read this, you need to understand what this is about, and we need to get this out of our communities. When I was in New Jersey, as I said earlier, New Jersey only had about 12 ICLEI members, right? And the whole, I think they have about 500 towns and townships or what have you. I went back to the motel the first night, and I just thought, let me just do a little Google search for it. I just put Sustainable New Jersey, and up popped their website, right? Didn't even know it existed. And they had a PowerPoint, which I was able to download, and within the 3rd or 4th frame, there's the UN General Assembly. They're telling us this has got nothing to do with the UN. Well, they're lying. Somebody's lying to us. See, so you don't have to belong to the ICLEI to be pushing Agenda 21.
How do you find out what towns do belong to it?
Well, I have a list that's on my Scribd page. You can probably go to the ICLEI's website, and you have to do a little search, but you can find it, and there it is, all the different towns and cities. Some good news, though, all over the country, this is being addressed like never before. It's very gratifying to see so many people, thanks to the Tea Party groups, the 912 groups, the John Birch Society, and many other groups. There's even left-wing groups. There's a group called Democrats Against Agenda 21. Now, these folks might like the idea of all these things, but they believe it should be done locally, which we can argue locally what's best for the town or the city or the state without having to bring in the UN. I don't know if the UN knows how to raise cranberries, but I think the people in Carver people here know how to fish better than the UN knows how to fish. If you need to save your bay, let's save the bay without bringing the UN in it. Oh, I did want to quote the scientist. I have the frame here. Jacques Cousteau, when I mentioned scientist. We know Jacques Cousteau was a highly decorated World War II veteran. He invented, he has a lot of inventions with dealing with the submarines and all that. You would think a great guy. He's deceased. He was a very well-received delegate at this Rio conference. This is what he said at the conference, on the bottom one. An American-born child environmentally is too expensive to maintain to his or her adulthood in a world economy. American women must be subjected to some manner of regulation beyond licensing and mandatory abortion practices. Do we all believe that?
No.
He wasn't booed and hissed, by the way. He was applauded for that comment. And they have a project like that. It's called Communist China, one-child policy. And you know what happens in China? They abort the girls. The feminists aren't complaining about it for some strange reason. And you have a lot more men than you have ladies, which is going to cause a problem too. I was in a plane a few years ago, and I happened to find this, there was this lady, an American lady with a Chinese baby and a few of her own children. The baby was badly burnt, and she said she was a missionary in China and found this child in the woods in a fire and brought the Shriners, the burn center, you know, they healed her up and all. And that's the regard they have. So that's the consequences of these kinds of policies. But in 1991, he was in the UNESCO Courier. UNESCO is the United Nations Environment, Scientific, Cultural Organization. And you can go right on the internet and find that, okay? So it's not something I'm made up in my febrile, right-wing conspiracy mind. I'm not that creative, even if I wanted to be. One American ties the earth much more than 20 Bangladeshis. World population must be stabilized, and to do that we must eliminate 350,000 people per day. And he said it's a terrible thing. He went on to say it's a terrible thing to say, but it's a terrible thing not to say it. Now do the math, 350 times 365. Yeah, made Hitler look like an amateur. And Mao Zedong would be very envious of this. Okay, so a call to action. How many people on Facebook, by the way? Oh, quite a few. There's a group called Stop, a Facebook page said Stop Agenda 21, Stop ICLEI. Lots of up-to-date information. I just learned that a town in Arizona got out of ICLEI, a town in Washington got out, several in Oklahoma have rescinded their membership, a couple of counties in Virginia and Maryland also did that. In Maine, we had a great story back in the fall of last year when it was just starting to, resurface. We had some of our members, as well as some other patriot-type folks, went to the governor, who was a pretty decent guy, Governor LePage. And they told him that the Gateway Project in central coastal Maine is really coming from the UN. It may not be a UN, a UN logo there, but that's where it's coming from. And he was convinced. And the next day he had a press conference and he said, no more state money going to this project. So that was a big success story, And we're going to see these success stories all over the country as we become more active. Those on the other side expect us to do nothing. And there'll be some people, and even in our circles, they're more interested in getting Republicans elected. They're not going to really think this is a big deal, but it is a big deal. This is probably one of the most important. I've been spending a lot of time with this. There's a lot of important issues out there, but this one we need to work on and expose it. So we should, and I'm very glad that there's Tea Party groups like this, and I'm so thankful to be invited to this group. I'm speaking to a group in Connecticut tomorrow night as well, with my updated PowerPoint here.
Which group in Connecticut?
It's the Connecticut Patriots and the Oath Keepers are kind of combining. So,
Who's your contact person, do you know?
I'm not certain offhand.
Mary's not there.
I don't think so, no. But anyway, there's also a group in, let's see, what town is it? It's on the coast, near New Haven. I'll be speaking there in early November. So, I also suggest that I want you to be very involved in this group, but the John Birch Society, we're a membership-based organization, and we might be able to have room if you want to join. We might be able to squeeze you in somehow with our growing members and all that. The New American Magazine is very highly recommended. It's a great tool. It's a tool to be used, and I have this in PDF format too. I'd be happy to get this to you on a regular basis. It comes out twice a month. It's something that's really indispensable. And I actually, on my script page, I have a collection of articles on Agenda 21. And on my YouTube, I have lots of videos on Agenda 21. And I want to touch smart meters too. Another success story in Maine, there was a legal case that said that you do not have to have a smart meter. A smart meter is really a listening device, communications device that's supposed to replace the meter that determines how much electricity you use, right? So you get your bill. But it does more than that. And it's actually designed, some of the more advanced ones will turn your stuff down. Oh, your AC is too high, we're going to turn it down for you. So I've heard that done some of this test project in Oakland. They always pick poor black neighborhoods to do a lot of the dirty work, you see. They get away with it. So I don't know all the details, and some of it's urban legend, so I don't want to say, yes, they're turning people's TV off in Oakland. I can't say that. But what this does, these smart meters do, is they'll say, okay, Hal has so many children and his wife, and, oh, but wait a minute now, there's more electricity this week. Oh, maybe there's someone unauthorized living there. Or maybe he has a business that's not registered. That's reason, probable cause for a warrant, you see? Right? So it's a lot more than just, oh, it's nice to know that. I got a letter from the electric company about a year ago. Well, you use more energy than the rest of the neighborhood. Well, it's because there were 10 people in our house. And, you know, it's considered a two-family, but it might be considered one unit, one extended family. So, of course, we're going to use more, because the people across the street have 3 people in their house. But why should they even tell us that? We pay the bill, right? And if you want to have an evaluation, we'll be happy to come over and how you're going to save money. That's fine. You don't need to tell me that my neighbor's using less than I am. But they'll have this information, and they can actually get warrants. Hey, you might have a business, like an unregistered business.
Growing.
Huh?
You could be growing.
You could be growing legal substances?
Yes.
Yeah. But
That's
the
how they-
bottom line is that, that it can be done. And also, other people can have access to this. You know, you have a reader. You know, it's like a wireless transmission. You can pick it up. And so it should be unconstitutional. And a lot of people don't even know they have one in the community. But I guess if you see it and you see a FEC, federal FCC on it,
Yeah.
that's a smart meter.
We just had I got an email that had a video of that from YouTube.
Yeah,
I was explaining that.
Yeah, it was a gentleman, it was like a Mickey Rooney style, Andy Rooney style, yeah, he does, and I think on his original one, he's got a form letter that you can use too, yeah. So he talks about it. I actually have it on my other computer before it crashed, so, so I think we're going to beat this, folks. I think it's taken a long time for the American people to wake up to the UN, but the ultimate goal is to get us out of the UN. And at this point, I'll be happy to entertain any questions.
Well, on the issue of the UN, you obviously know a lot about it. I mean, what about, is there any kind of tie-in, or is just multi-tentacle of the UN trying to interfere with sovereignties? Talking about the gun ban treaty, the small...
That's another arm, yes. The UN has long advocated complete control of weapons. Now, let me see if I have this little... Back in 1961, there was something called...
Hillary just signed that, right?
What's that?
Hillary just signed that for the administration.
Yes, I believe she's... Here it is. This was something that came from Freedom from War. The United States Program for General and Complete Disarmament in a Peaceful World. This was introduced by the Kennedy administration. It calls for a standing world army and civilian disarmament. There'll only be a local police and enough to maintain internal order. All the other weapons will be destroyed. 1961. And this policy has been the policy of our State Department. And the State Department, as well as every federal branch, is pushing Agenda 21. You walk into the post office, you get green stamps. Not the kind that used to be able to, you buy green stamps and you get a toaster after so many stamps. You say, we're talking about, save the planet, buy these. Every arm in the schools, the NEA, National Education Association, is pushing Agenda 21. They are, I believe, an NGO of the UN, and they're the largest union in the country, too, by the way. So all of these folks are doing this. And this goes back to 61, and there's a lot of opposition to it, by the way. And what they want to do is they'll say, oh, we're not going to take your guns away. That's ridiculous. But they'll make it impossible to sell or to buy or, yeah.
You know obviously a lot about it. I mean, what little I've read about it is, I guess they're, at least the administration's selling it to us on the notion that it's protecting us because of terrorism.
Right.
That's like the new angle.
It's always, what did Benjamin Franklin say? Those who want to trade in their, I'm paraphrasing, trade in their freedoms for safety will have neither and deserve neither, or will lose both, what have you. So that's the principle. Yes, we create the problem. We fund Bin Laden, and we wonder why he does these things. We fund Gaddafi. We allow Gaddafi to take power. We allow our companies to go in there and set up shop, and then we know all about this guy, and we wonder why he's doing these things, and then we have to take him out. Or I call it the Dictator of the Month Club. What happens in Iran, we set the stage for that many, many years ago. You might remember the Iranian hostage crises and all that, and the Shah, who was a friendly ally. We took him out of power, and on it goes. We dare suggest that this is just stupidity. It's just dumb policies are doing this, right? And we can go over all these different cases of how the United States, elements within our government, not the government in general, have created the problem only to solve it. Yeah.
I got a question. Where does Agenda 21 go along with the tree seed
Law of the Sea Treaty?
Sea Treaty.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, the Agenda 21 has their own specific
Because you
arm.
brought up fishing earlier,
But
that's
yes,
going to take
but
care
the
of
Law
all
of the Sea
fishing.
Treaty, right, they lost, which goes back to the 60s, I think,
Yeah.
right? And of course, you're a fishing community here, or were at one time. And again, our own federal government is doing enough to destroy the industry. But the UN, see, the UN says everything belongs to us. We're going to be able to tax, we're going to be able to complete control. So it hasn't been passed, we haven't signed on to it yet. And if it does, it gives them UN control of the oceans, which is what, 85% of the world or something like that? Yeah.
Well, it goes right along with the North American Union and all the other stuff going on.
So there's a long time drive for what Daddy Bush said, a New World Order. We're all familiar with that term, New World Order? George Bush, a Republican, and this is not Republicans and Democrats, both parties at the top are into this. When George Bush sat there, stood up in front of a joint session of of Congress, and he said, this UN, this Iraq, the first Iraq war, he said, what will come out of this is a New World Order and a UN envisioned by its founders. Well, who were its founders? I told you one of them was Al Shurtleff. It's interesting that, about 15 or so years ago when NAFTA was being debated, I had a letter in the newspaper. And someone else wrote a letter, a guy named Field. His last name was Field. I forget his first name. And he lived not too far from me. So I got his address before you had Facebook and all that stuff. You had to go to phone books, you know. Facebook, from phone book to Facebook, it was quite a jump. I found his address and I sent him a little letter, thanked him. He wrote back to me and he said, he thanked me for this information, and he said he respects the John Birch Society. He said, I'm a progressive, which means left. That's funny how they steal words, right? Progressive is a good word, but they take it and mean something else. He said, he said, a lot of my family members are conservatives, but I did have an uncle who was a State Department communist. His name was Field, and he's the one that had to flee. He was at the UN conference with Al Shurtleff. And he had to flee to East Germany because he was going to be prosecuted, you see. So it's kind of interesting how these folks are involved here. So, any other questions? Oh, Greg. Oh, yes.
Now, what's the rate of towns and communities signing up currently? Is there anything?
Oh, you know something? I think there's close to 1,000, maybe between 800 to 1,000 in the country. And that includes counties, too.
What's the rate at which they're signing on?
Oh.
Successes that we're having, is it at this point even as many sign up?
No, they're just starting to pull out. We're talking about since maybe in the spring. You know, and you know, some of them are pulling out for the right reason, some of them are just pulling out, but they're still Agenda 21 driven towns. Like say Massachusetts has this Green Communities Act that was passed 3 years ago by our governor that came out of nowhere, just like our president. And so you don't have to be part of an ICLEI to be part of this green communities. But not every town is buying into it. And there are more and more activists that are actually going to their town hall meetings for the first time in their lives. And there's some select people that are being elected that are stopping it. So, you know, so there's a lot of good things going on, but it's not nearly enough. I mean, it's not like we wiped out half of them. We got a long way to go. Yeah.
How do you find out if your town is involved?
You could probably go to the town hall. Now, I don't know about Rhode Island. Is there a Sustainable Rhode Island? Is there an entity called Sustainable Rhode Island? Well, I'm going to go to my motel tonight and find out. I'm going to go on the internet.
The research I did, that I found out, Portsmouth, Warwick, Pawtucket, Providence was members of ICLEI. And then Providence just pulled out supposedly when Tavares got in there.
Now, when you hear terms like sustainable development, smart growth, or things like that, there's a good chance that there's some involvement. So I would call your town hall, call your town manager, just ask. Ask if is this a sustainable community? And I'm going to do a search tonight when I get to whatever motel we're staying in and see Sustainable Rhode Island to see what is going on here. Yeah. So, like Vermont, you expect Vermont to be all completely, and there's only like 4 towns in this that belong to ICLEI, but there's got to be I'm going to be in Vermont in a few weeks, so actually next week, so there's probably a Sustainable Vermont.
You have someone who wants you there?
What's that? We have a full-time field rep in Vermont, yeah, so that's a tough state, but it's a beautiful state.
Do you have counterparts throughout the United States? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
So you're in the Northeast?
Yeah, well, there's other folks, and there's guys like Tom DeWeese, who will speak on it all over the place, Dr. Michael Kaufman. Tom DeWeese has been working on this since the beginning, '92, since the beginning of the Rio conference. And now he's now booked almost every day of the week. He's out of Virginia. And you know, you can just get one of these videotapes and show it. You don't have to get up there with a PowerPoint. Just, hey, this is what's happening here, folks.
We can show this.
You can show this. The show, you know.
Smile, Dan.
People start turning up, I start doing that. Yeah. But yeah, and again, I've been more invitations to more groups in the last couple of months. I mean, New Jersey, we had mayors and town selectmen, I guess they call them stakeholders, I think, in New Jersey, aren't they? They're elected officials, town officials. When's the last time a mayor shows up to one of your meetings? When they're showing up, that means they're paying attention.
Yeah.
In Carver, we had a room, hot August night. No one comes in August, it's too hot, everyone's on vacation. Almost 100 people in this room to hear two people we weren't exactly household names. It was a topic that brought them in.
Was it smart meter? Is that the smart meter?
Well, it was the fact, it was Agenda 21 in general. And my friend and colleague, Dave, I call him a colleague, we're not, Dave Kopatz, I think you might know Dave. And Dave's actually a town conservation officer, so he's at ground zero. When they come in with their vernal pools, oh, here's a vernal pool in someone's backyard, you can't use your property anymore, And he calls up and he'll say, anybody on your property? Anyone get permission to come on your property? He said, no. So they're just trespassing. They're encouraging people that trespass, break the law, and if there's a vernal pool, then they have different rules to say what that is, and before you know it, you can't use your property anymore. So it's happening all over the country, And he lives in a town of Ware, which is a small town in central Massachusetts, not too far from here, I guess. Well, Rhode Island's such a small state, Massachusetts is pretty close anywhere. And he said in one day, or a couple of days, he got 40 requests, applications to determine whether this was a vernal pool. He called everyone on the phone. Nobody gave him permission to come. So, and he has these zoning maps of some of the rural communities in Massachusetts. Agenda 21 all over it.
Can you show that map again?
Yeah. Oh yeah, the wildlands map. Well, you get a local map, and what it says is, they'll have conservation land where most of the people are living. And that means you can't build on it anymore. You can't farm after that. Once your grandfather, it's it. It's over. There it is, right
What's
there.
the red part again? What?
The red part is very limited activity. No development, nobody's living there. Unless you're a bureaucrat or belong to the Audubon Society, by the way, which is another NGO, the Lovable Audubon Society, which you have just up the street. They do a lot of nice work, but they're pushing Agenda 21. And let me tell you something else too. You get a lot of these land trusts. No, there's nothing wrong with preserving land, okay? But you get a land trust that will go to old Mrs. Brown, and they will say, look, Mrs. Brown, you turn your land over to us. You live here till the day you die, and she passes away, or Mr. Brown passes away. That land now is totally off limits to anything. In the town of Ware, as an example, there was a farm. The owner handed it to a trust, and the trust got federal money and state money to buy the stuff up, a dollar, pennies on the dollar, what have you. And they were trying to get complete, they call them agricultural easements. No development whatsoever, right? And they were supposed to keep this farm up and running. Now, just a few days ago, I was on a farm that was owned by a gentleman I knew. He was 102 when he passed away, and he hadn't been farming in several decades. But it's now a farm, and it's privately owned. And it was sold to a local land trust that sold it to farmers to farm. You can have a tractor, you can cut trees down, you can raise chickens and sell eggs and all that. That was a good land trust. But some of these land trusts are coming in working, and they're NGOs. An NGO means non-government organization, and the NGOs are certified by the UN. So they're acknowledged by the UN. Their purpose is to promote the UN's agenda. So they'll buy this land, take it off the rolls, the tax rolls, and there'll be very little development going, if any. So, yeah.
Is that what they're doing with the Blackstone?
The Blackstone River?
Yeah. Between Massachusetts and Rhode Island?
Yeah, well, that's supposed to be part of the federal, that's part of it. That's also part of Agenda 21, these national heritage corridors.
They're going to make it so you can't pull water out of the river anymore.
Yep, and you know what, these floods in Vermont, well, the gentleman, I didn't meet him yet, but a friend of mine had a lengthy conversation with him. He's a writer, he's an environmental scientist. He said that you used to be able to, every year, clean off the debris, the gravel that builds up, and the branches. You haven't been able to do that for like 20 years. Has something to do with this act, this terrible land act. Maybe you know more about it than I do. And he thinks that's what causes a lot of the flooding, is that you weren't able to, and you use the gravel for cement and for building. Well, you can't do that anymore. In the last 20 years, it's been accumulating, and it's because they consider the streams and the lakes to be owned by the streams and rivers are federal property. You can't touch it. If you do, you're fined. Yeah.
Aperion, I think it's called Aperion Institute for Sustainable Living. they're the ones that's handling everything in Rhode Island.
Oh, okay.
And their sustainable is working and living in ways that can continue for generations to come. Examples of sustainable practices are meeting our energy needs from clean, renewable sources. It goes down here, they say they want to make Rhode Island the first state that is completely complicit with.
Okay, what's the name of the company?
Period. AP,
That's not the Handy's company.
APERION Institute for Sustainable Living.
Andy's company?
Handy's tied in with
No.
them. Yeah.
So that's your smoking gun here in Rhode Island.
And it says, we invite you to join us now and help transform Rhode Island into the nation's first sustainable state. In 2008, Sustainable Rhode Island began a targeted membership program to create sustainability practitioners in 3 areas: households, schools, and business. Our goal is to create a critical mass or tipping point of people and institutions making their homes, organizations, communities sustainable such that they become beacons of change that ripple outward to ever-growing numbers of Rhode Island.
Okay, well, that's the group that's probably a nonprofit corporation, right? And a 501c3, yeah.
I don't know where you'd find that on here, but this is their website.
Yeah, well, let's, why don't you say it to the camera so they can pick it up there?
Aperion, A-P-E-R-I.
If I can go online here and find it.
No, A-P-E-I-R-O-N.
Oh,
Apeiron.
A-P, read it again?
A-P-E,
No, you said I.
no, A-P-E-I-R-O-N.
Okay, got it.
I mean, if you represent the Handy's name, he'll be tied into that institution.
Well, there you go, folks. That's the local one. That's the Rhode Island group. And I would look and see what towns bought into this, and that's where the fight is.
Okay.
So I found funny, just go ahead and Google,
Yeah.
development Rhode Island.
Sustainable Rhode Island, and you'll be able to find, and that's where then you can say, okay, is it my town or my abutting town? This is where you get this information into their hands. And everyone should take at least one of these DVDs. They're complimentary, but you want to get more, I get about a couple hundred with me. You know, they're very inexpensive.
Do you know of any involvement by universities and colleges with sustainability?
I would
That's
say
the first-
totally. I would say totally.
So you
All
think it's a great-
all the state ones.
All the state
Oh,
ones?
I would say so, yeah.
The first time I heard the word sustainability, I mean, applied in this sense,
Yeah.
was from a professor at Johnson & Wales. And he was going to a seminar in Maine on food sustainability. And I said, what's all that about? And when he said sustainability, I don't know, it was equal to social justice and
Yes,
all this
it's
stuff.
not just about, it's about transforming the whole culture,
Yes.
everything.
I mean, about...
Education, it's not just about taking our land away, it's about completely, as I said, and this is being pushed in all of the schools, colleges, public schools, many private schools, even probably some Christian-based schools that buy into it. There's Christian groups that I believe there's global warming, we got to resolve this, so.
I have one other thing. If you're familiar with the UN stuff, in the middle part of this pamphlet, the last point says equal rights for all living and non-living objects. Is that?
That's right in Agenda 21.
It's right in Agenda 21.
Oh, yeah.
So equal rights for rocks and rivers.
Yeah, they're people too, I guess, yeah. According to the UN, yeah. It's crazy. It really is insane.
It is.
But these people aren't crazy. They know it's a big power. Just think of it as a power grab. I don't think Mikhail Gorbachev believes this stuff. I don't even think Al Gore believes it, because if he did, he'd be living in a small cabin and not this big mansion. And he's a multi-millionaire. He's a billionaire, by the way. So I don't think if they really believe that they'd have these lifestyles. They want to destroy your lifestyle because your middle-class lifestyle is the big, according to Maurice Strong, one of the men that oversaw this Rio conference, you're the biggest threat in the world, is your lifestyle, so it has to be changing. And we have to, and they're not going to do it to the point of a gun, we're going to just go along with it because we think it's wonderful, you know, and it's all
It
going to
really
be...
is ingenious.
Yes.
Speaking of that, 2 weeks ago, I got a telephone call from the NRA, National Rifle Association, and they wanted to do a survey. Was I for or against people being allowed to possess guns, or should they all be taken away from us?
Yeah.
And I said, I believe that somewhere in the Constitution or Bill of Rights, we have the right to protect ourselves with guns.
Right.
And he agreed with me. And he says, how did you know that? I says, well, I've been going to the
Tea Party.
Tea Party
Yeah.
meetings, and I'm learning all this stuff.
Yeah.
And I said, he says, well, he says, did you know that they're trying to get a bill passed in the future of limiting the gun sales and then eventually getting rid of the guns? And I says, well, I guess I ought to go out and buy a gun now so I can protect myself.
Well, that's their goal, you know, to make it tough to own one, and then, you know, eventually do away with that Second Amendment.
He said, when you go to these meetings, he says, you should make sure that people know that that's what's going to be next on the agenda.
I didn't want to address it now, but to sort of segue into it, a couple of weeks ago, there was a conference at Harvard University, Harvard in Boston and Cambridge, dealing with the Constitutional Convention and the push to have a con-con. And you've got a few calls in your state already. And Rhode Island Common Cause is behind it, and there was a liberal Democrat who's in the House right now in Rhode Island. I can get you his name. He's pushing it too. And you get people on the so-called right pushing it. You've got different groups pushing it as well. And we have to stop it, because if they're successful, they'll have this con-con, and they'll propose things that are completely detrimental to what we have today. And they'll say, well, there's no way that 38 states assemblies will vote for it. They can have ratifying committees. They can hand-pick how that will be chosen. That's how they did with prohibition. Utah passed, you know, Utah was a dry state in those days. Mormons aren't drinkers, so you weren't going to get any amendment passed that was going to repeal prohibition, the 21st Amendment. So they said, we'll have ratifying committees. So that's what they can do. And keep in mind, we have a lot of ignorance out there. We understand the Constitution somewhat, most of us pretty well, but the average person does not. I'll give you an example. I do information tables all the time. And there's a lot of groups where there's when we're preaching to the choir, you know, different Tea Party groups, people pretty much speak the language. We have differences here and there, but pretty much on the same page. Go to a county fair, right? I did a county fair in Cheshire, New Hampshire, not too far from Keene. And a petition to stop illegal immigration, right? Petition your congressman. So the question is, when they come, they want to sign the petition because they're complete agreement against illegal immigration. Who's your congressman? 95% of the people, adults, do not know who the congressman is. That's pretty, you know, I do use the word scary.
Yeah.
And I'd say that's one reason why we're here, to help understand. And you only have 2 members of Congress in New Hampshire, pretty easy, you know, 2 districts. Rhode Island is 2.
Yeah.
But most people, if you don't even know who your congressman is, and I'd say to you that that's the way they like it. One lady came to the table and we had an stop Obamacare, stop illegal immigration. And she said, I'm going to lose my job because of Obamacare. She works for a company that makes medical equipment, and there's a big tax that will be kicked in a couple of years, 10%, which will put a lot of companies out of business. And I said, does your congressman know how you think about it? She had no idea who a congressman was. And I said, I guarantee you the people behind Obamacare know exactly who the member of Congress was, and they were in touch with that person on a regular basis. So that's why it's important for us in this group to go out there, not just to, you know, hey, this is how your government works, because you're not getting this anymore. They don't even know who the congressman is. Oh, that means we have to get out of here?
I got one thing to say. Through the Apron group right there, there's students that came out of Brown 2 years ago that have a group called Project Get Ready, which is financed through this Apron group. They've actually passed gut legislation through the State House for the electric car. Certain parking spots they're going to have downtown for free parking.
That's right.
They're going to have certain rights on the roads where your aspirated car cannot do, but their electric car can.
And again, if this was market driven,
Coming right out of Brown.
you know, they had electric cars 100 years ago. You see, they had, you know, the Stanley steamers. They had all kinds of things. It just wasn't feasible. So, yeah, and that's another. There was remember, we have a Tea Party group in North Quabbin. A lady, one of the lady who runs it, I think, is she's a town official, environmental, and that's another thing. One of these commissions they set up, and they're talking about having these electric places we can recharge your electric cars. She said, we don't even have any electric cars yet. What are we talking about? She's all, what's going on here? You know. So yeah, of course, yeah.
We need to really step it up, guys. We really need to get, everybody should tell these 10 people.
There's a move in the state of Rhode Island, in fact there is a law that says each of the towns has to have low-income housing, 10% of the housing. The town I'm from, Barrington, Rhode Island, has a new view of their planning, and they want to change the building ordinances so that, irregular lots, small lots, to increase the density.
Yeah.
Is there any correlation that you're finding?
Well, that's probably, I told you about this Renaissance downtowns. That's exactly, when I went to this storefront, that's exactly what they had. This mixed units, densely populated. And so I would say, without knowing the plan, that's what I would say. I went in there, big thing, it said smart growth, and on my other updated, when my computer crashed, I got my updated one. I thought I had the updated one, but I had a picture of that. So that's where it's coming from. So I would probably say yes, exactly is what they're doing there. And again, they want to get rid of the idea of, buying things. If you have 1,000 square feet, you can't have a lawnmower. You can't have one couch and maybe a handful of books. You can't really have much in your place. So, you can't afford it. No place to put it. So a lot they're trying to diminish. Like I say, they look at the middle class in the United States as the biggest threat to the world, and this is how they eradicate it. And Agenda 21 means the 21st century. So don't expect this to happen in 6 months. It's an incremental stage. I have 5 children, so I got 5 reasons, 5 big reasons to work on this. And my son, he's doing his homeschool work and upstairs or in the van. And he's usually with me in these presentations, and I said, we have 2 options here. My son's generation, he's 14, will be the generation that will lead our nation back under the Constitution. And that's the optimistic one. The one that isn't optimistic, they will be the generation that will be a second-class citizen in a land that will be a second-class and despised minority in the land of their ancestors. And I'm optimistic that we can turn this thing around. So I think freedom is a wonderful concept, isn't it? Much more than slavery or tyranny or Agenda 21. Freedom is great.
Do you have a newsletter or something? Do you have a newsletter?
The John Birch Society has a monthly newsletter, a bulletin. We have a bi-monthly magazine. So, so I encourage you to become, to join their organization and work with this group. I don't want to detract anything that you do here. In fact, redouble your efforts and get more people out and involved in this. But like I said earlier, we can have room. And also, we have a great camp program, as Marina mentioned earlier. It's called Camp Constitution. It's totally separate from any. It's not part of the John Birch Society. I happen to be the camp director. And this past summer, we had close to 100 people, young people, whole families, from as far as Michigan to Virginia, but not one from Rhode Island. So we get a handful from Rhode Island, and it's a family camp. Whole families come. We had little babies up to mother and dad, and up to even grandparents. And
Now, if we have our next meeting, number 50, you don't mind, can we just show this?
probably like to do a better version of this one. But
Want to come back?
Of course I'll come back.
All right.
Yeah.
Maybe we could do a camp like 4th of July week in Bristol.
Yeah, that'd be nice. Yeah. This camp, next year's camp, I got some brochures about the camp. Next year's camp is the 15th. It's the 7th to the 13th. It's in Ringe, New Hampshire, not too far away. And
Let's book it. It's November 15th.
we're our prices are very reasonable too, and we have tuition assistance available. So we have unaccompanied minors, we have unaccompanied adults, we have whole families, and it's a great experience.
Yeah,
We teach them the history, but we also teach them to be activists. We'll take the whole camp out, and we'll visit all the towns and pass out constitutions. What you can't do here in Bristol, we can do in Jaffrey and Ringe and other towns. And we want these young people to see the influence they have, that they just used it. And the adults, the same way. There's a lot of activists, but they become better activists when they're out there doing it. So, yeah. So campconstitution.us, we have a YouTube channel with a lot of good videos on there, a lot of our classes, good stuff up there, and we need help and support, So, and we love to have a chain of these around the country.
Yeah.
So Camp Constitution in the box or something like that. I don't know. But a chain of them, and we don't even have to be affiliated directly. We just here's our syllabus, and do what we'll help you, and a weekend camp, even a winter camp doesn't have to be a whole week, but there's a lot of camaraderie too. It's not just about learning things, but it's building.
Rhode Island Hope was involved.
Who?
Rhode Island Hope?
I don't think so offhand. I don't think so.
Okay.
So, all right. Well, thank you. We have to be out of here in a little while. So thank you so much.